Hey, what's up, guys? It's Mr. Davidian, and right now you guys are looking at a passage from Matthew chapter 5 called the Beatitudes, or in other words, the Sermon on the Mount, as it's normally called, by Jesus. And so in the Bible, Matthew, one of his disciples or apostles, he was a former tax collector, uh, which in that period of time, in 30 AD, a tax collector was sort of like a mobster, mafia, gangster type of person. And so that person was living kind of taking money from people on the streets, because he could. He was a tax collector, because he could threaten people with jail. So then one day Jesus asks Matthew, "Hey, follow me." And so Matthew's life changes and obviously starts doing some good things. So here, Matthew, obviously, he's educated, so he's able to write really well and record Jesus' words. And so that's why he's one of the writers, one of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So here Matthew is writing or copying down what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount of Olives. I don't think it was Mount of Olives. It was just a mountain. Jesus gives this famous sermon. And this is one of the most famous speeches ever written. So what I'd like you guys to do is take a look at the Beatitudes. Obviously, you're going to start off by seeing a lot of rhetorical devices back in Jesus' time. This is sort of like new and interesting. And then obviously he starts off sort of with a lot of poetic structure and memorable structure. So kind of analyze that in terms of rhetorical devices and what type of devices he chooses, who his audience is, what are his purposes, and how those devices affect the audience. And then after verse number 10, he starts giving some different contrasts. I won't give you the hint on what type of contrast, but you'll notice if you see the word "but," then obviously that's an opposite. And so I don't want to tell you what that is, but you'll see what it is. And so go all the way down. He starts contrasting here. You have heard it said of old, "You should not commit murder," but I say to you. And so then you'll see some contrast there. You have heard it said of old, "You should not commit adultery," but I say to you. And then you'll notice that. And then down here, you have heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, Old Testament. And let's see, the footnote would be Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. And so, but I say to you. And then, of course, he talks about love. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, and I'm not going to tell it to you. So we'll stop at chapter 5. So what I'd like you guys to do is you can pause the video. I'll scroll through it slowly, and you guys can pause the video, look at rhetorical devices, and look at it in terms of the major themes that we've talked about this year. Education was chapter 4. Chapter 6 was community. And if you look at some of the major passages we've read, Martin Luther King, Letter from Birmingham Jail, Scarlet Letter, chapters 1 and 2, maybe a little bit of, as we've gone through chapter 11. You can look at that. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, and also Henry David Thoreau, What I Live For. So there's a couple different passages that we've read that discuss community. We've looked at religious themes with different clergymen in Letter from Birmingham Jail. So analyze the Beatitudes or Sermon on the Mount in terms of how communities are supposed to stay together. Obviously, Jesus gives this speech to a bunch of different types of communities, and or at least a broad community or a broad audience. So what are his purposes for that community? What is his intention? And is he persuasive enough for these communities? And then you can look at how do we keep communities together? Can communities be too strict with sort of different religious laws or civil laws or even political laws? When you look at Scarlet Letter, they were trying to keep their community together with religion as well. And so what are kind of the ins and outs, ups and downs, pros and cons of having rules? And just look at the pros and cons of that. I don't want to help you too much, but you can definitely see the pros and cons in the Scarlet Letter from Birmingham Jail. And so Martin Luther King in Letter from Birmingham Jail quotes Jesus as saying he was an extremist and he died on the cross as an extremist. And so let's look at what Jesus has to say here. Are these views extreme? And can you see how they try to bring communities together? Or is it a way to divide communities? And so good luck. Take a look at the Sermon on the Mount. I'll scroll through it.